I scored 1590 on the SAT, and here's a walkthrough of digital SAT practice test 2's reading and writing section. As Mexico's first president from an indigenous community, Benito Juarez became one of the most blank figures in his country's history. Among many significant accomplishments of his long tenure in office, Juarez consolidated the authority of the national government and advanced the rights of indigenous peoples. Okay, so it looks like he had a successful tenure, which was filled with significant accomplishments. We have option A, unpredictable. That wouldn't make sense. B, important. That would make sense since he had many significant accomplishments. C, secretive. We don't talk about it being secretive, and it's obviously not ordinary because he had many significant accomplishments, so our answer has to be B. Due to their often strange images, highly experimental syntax, and opaque subject matter, many of John Ashbery's poems can be quite difficult to blank and are thus the object of heated debate among scholars. Probably something along the lines of interpret. Okay, that would be what would make the most sense there. Because they have opaque subject matter, they're highly experimental syntax, they have strange images that would make them difficult to interpret, not compose, not delegate, not renounce, but difficult to interpret. The Cambrian explosion gets its name from the sudden appearance and rapid diversification of animal remains in the fossil record about 541 million years ago. During the Cambrian period, some scientists argue that this blank change in the fossil record might be because of a shift in many organisms to body types that were more likely to be preserved. Okay, well, we see that we have a rapid diversification of animal remains in the fossil record, so I would assume that this is a rapid change or something along those lines. So we've got option A, catastrophic. Well, we don't have a catastrophic change in the fossil record. We have option B, elusive change. That wouldn't really make sense. An abrupt change or a sudden change is pretty similar to a rapid, or would support the rapid diversification of animal remains. So that would make sense from the sudden appearance and rapid diversification. So abrupt would make sense, okay, going along the lines of sudden appearance and rapid diversification. D, imminent, that would make sense. Okay, so our best answer there would be C, abrupt. During a 2014 archaeological dig in Spain, Vincent Lull and his team uncovered the skeleton of a woman from El Algar, an early Bronze Age society, buried with valuable objects signaling a high position of power. This finding may persuade researchers who have argued that Bronze Age societies were ruled by men to blank that women may also have held leadership roles. Okay, so we have they were ruled by men to possibly believe. Okay, it would be something along those lines. We've got option A, waive, that wouldn't make sense. To concede that women may also have held these leadership roles, that would make a lot of sense there. Refute, well, they wouldn't be refuting that women may have held these roles in light of this new evidence. They would actually be conceding that, and they can't require that. So the best answer there would be B, concede. Within baleen whale species, some individuals develop an accessory spleen, a seemingly functionless formation of splenic tissue outside the normal spleen. Given the formation's greater prevalence among whales known to make deeper dives, some researchers hypothesize that its role isn't, I would guess, meaningless, because that's what we say above. We have rather the accessory spleen may actively support diving mechanisms. Okay, so we've got options of replicable, that wouldn't make sense. B, predetermined wouldn't make sense. We've got operative and latent. Latent would basically mean meaningless. Okay, operative wouldn't make sense here because we're saying that it isn't meaningless or it isn't latent. Okay, it does have a purpose, so we wouldn't say it isn't operative because we're arguing that it is operative. Okay, so our answer there would have to be D. According to a U.S. tax policy expert, state taxes are blank. Other factors when considering an interstate move. So we have state taxes are consistent with, representative of, overshadowed by, or relevant to. Let's keep reading. Even significant differences in state taxation have almost no effect on most people's decisions, while differences in employment opportunities, housing availability, and climate are strong influences. Okay, so we're talking about why people would choose to move. We're saying that state taxes are not one of the major factors when people choose where to move. So we've got state taxes are consistent with other factors, no. Representative of other factors, no. Overshadowed by other factors, yes. Irrelevant to other factors, no. Okay, they're overshadowed by these other factors that we then go on to list, including climate, housing availability, employment opportunities. The authors claim about the relationship between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens is blank as it fails to account for several recent archaeological discoveries, so probably weak. Or something along those lines. To be convincing, his argument would need to address recent finds of additional hominoid fossils, such as the latest Denisovans specimens in Homo longi, which choice best completes with the most logical and precise word or phrase. Okay, so his argument is disorienting wouldn't make sense. We'd talk about that if someone was like knocked unconscious and getting up and they're disoriented, don't really know what's going on. We have B, tenuous. Tenuous would essentially mean weak in this context, so that would make sense. And then we have C, nuanced. Okay, well, it's not nuanced. They're arguing that it's weak because it doesn't account for recent archaeological discoveries. Unoriginal, they're not arguing about the originality, so B would be our best answer there. The following text is from George Douglas Johnson's 1992 poem, Benediction. Go forth, my son, winged by my heart's desire, great reaches yet unknown, await for your possession. I may not. If I would retrace the way with you, my pilgrimage is through, but life is calling you. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Well, we see that she's kind of urging her son to go forth sort of with her will, with her sort of passion and joy, to go towards what possibly could be like a new land. It sounds like a pilgrimage. So maybe that's a new stage of life. Maybe that's new land. Let's see what our options are. We've got option A, to express hope that a child will have the same accomplishments as his parent did. Well, she actually wants him to have more accomplishments, so that would make sense. B, to suggest that raising a child involves many struggles. No. C, to warn a child that he will face many challenges throughout his life. That's not really what she's warning him. She's just kind of urging him to go on to this new, better sort of life filled with possession, right? This sort of pilgrimage journey. We have D, to encourage a child to embrace the experiences life will offer. Yes, D would be our answer there. The following text is adapted from Indian Boyhood, a 1902 memoir by Oheza, a Santee, Dakota writer. In the text, Oheza recalls how the women in his tribe harvested maple syrup during his childhood. Now the women began to test the trees, moving leisurely among them, axe in hand, and striking a single quick blow to see if the sap would appear. The trees, like people, have their individual characters. Some were ready to yield up their lifeblood, while others were more reluctant. In this case, since I have something underlined, I'll quick take a look at what we're going to be talking about with that. We have which choice best describes the function of the underlined sense in the text as a whole. Now one of the birchen basins was set under each tree, and a hardwood chip driven deep into the cut which the axe had made. From the corners of this chip, at first drop by drop, then more freely, the sap trickled into the little dishes. All right, so ultimately we've got sort of this talk about trees, comparing them in a way to people, having their individual characters, some being ready to give up their lifeblood. In that case, I'm going to assume that's referring to the sap from the tree, while others were more reluctant. So in other words, some of the trees are giving sap, some will not. So if we go down, let's take a look at our answer choices. We've got A, which is it portrays the range of personality traits displayed by the woman as they work. We're not displaying any sort of personality traits there. We say that they have their individual characters, but then we go on to sort of elaborate on that, saying that some are able to, or were ready to yield up their lifeblood while others were more reluctant. That's pretty much what we're referring to. We're referring back to that individual characters when we say that. So basically we're just talking about some are ready to give up their sap, some are not. We've got B, it foregrounds the beneficial relationship between humans and maple trees. We're not talking about any sort of mutualism type of symbiotic relationships. That doesn't make sense. C, it demonstrates how human behavior can be influenced by the natural environment. Nowhere does it demonstrate that. And then D, it elaborates on an aspect of the maple trees that the women evaluate. That would make the most sense because they're evaluating them on whether or not they're reluctant to give up their lifeblood. In other words, whether the tree is ready to give sap or whether it's not ready to give sap. Okay, so D would be the best answer there. Text 1. Ecologists have long wondered how thousands of microscopic phytoplankton species can live together near ocean surfaces competing for the same resources. According to conventional wisdom, and that's underlined, so I'm going to go down and see what we're asked about that, if anything, or if we have more context. We have, based on the text, how would Barenfield and colleagues, text 2, most likely respond to quote-unquote conventional wisdom discussed in text 1, so we need to know what that conventional wisdom is. So let's go up and keep reading. Okay, we've got, according to conventional wisdom, one species should emerge after outcompeting the rest. Okay, so that's what the conventional wisdom is. So I'll just write CW for conventional wisdom. One species should emerge after outcompeting the rest. So why do so many species remain? Ecologists' many efforts to explain this phenomenon still haven't uncovered a satisfactory explanation. We can go down to text 2 now. We've got ecologists, Barenfield, and colleagues have connected phytoplankton's diversity to their microscopic size. Because these organisms are so tiny, they are spaced relatively far apart from each other in ocean water, and moreover experience that water as a relatively dense substance. Thus, in turn, makes it hard for them to move around and interact with one another. Therefore, says Barenfield's team, direct competition among phytoplankton probably happens much less than previously thought. Okay, so we know that there's not really much direct competition among the phytoplankton. Okay, so we've got, based on the text, how Barenfield and colleagues text 2 most likely respond to conventional wisdom in text 1, which is that one species should emerge after outcompeting the rest. Well, the people in text 2 state that there really isn't much competition, so they wouldn't expect one species to emerge. So we have option A, by arguing that it is based on a misconception about phytoplankton species competing with one another. Okay, well, that makes sense because they do state that phytoplankton species don't actually compete with each other. The one concern that I would have with answer choice A is pretty much just that in text 1, they don't directly sort of discuss the phytoplankton. However, we do need to keep in mind that in the question, we're specifically just asked about the conventional wisdom in text A, which is really just kind of that one sentence. So A makes a lot of sense here. I'll leave that with a check for now, and I'll go through B, C, and D just to make sure. We've got B, by asserting that it fails to recognize that routine replenishments of ocean nutrients prevents competition among phytoplankton species. We never make the claim that it's because of the replenishment of ocean nutrients. C, by suggesting that there own findings help clarify how phytoplankton species are able to compete with larger organisms. We don't talk about competition with larger organisms. And then we have D, by recommending that more ecologists focus their research on how competition among phytoplankton species increase with water density. They don't ever recommend that more ecologists focus their research on that. Okay, so A would be our answer there. In 2014, Amelia Kwan and her team at NASA set out to build a helicopter capable of flying on Mars. Because Mars's atmosphere is only 1% as dense as Earth's, the air of Mars would not provide enough resistance to the rotating blades of a standard helicopter for the aircraft to stay aloft. For 5 years, Kwan's team tested designs in a lab that mimicked Mars's atmospheric conditions. The craft the team ultimately designed can fly on Mars because its blades are longer and rotate faster than those of a helicopter of the same size built for Earth. According to the text, why would a helicopter built for Earth be unable to fly on Mars? Okay, it makes this really clear if we go back up. It says because Mars is only 1%, Mars's atmosphere is only 1% as dense as Earth, the air on Mars wouldn't provide enough resistance for the rotating blades of a standard helicopter. Okay, so very, very clear. So we've got option B, because Mars and Earth have different atmospheric conditions. That looks perfect. We can quick check the other answers. Because the blades of helicopters built for Earth are too large. No. We got C, because the gravity on Mars is much weaker than gravity. No, we're talking about air resistance. D, because helicopters built for Earth are too small to handle the conditions. No. Answer, there's got to be A. Super, super explicit support for that in the text. In West Africa, jailists have traditionally been keepers of information about family histories and records of important events. They often have served as teachers and advisors too. New technologies may have changed some aspects of their role today, but jailists continue to be valued for knowing and protecting their people's histories. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? Well, we're basically talking about how jailists have traditionally been these keepers of information. So we got option A, even though there may have been some changes in their role, jailists continue to preserve their community's histories. Yes, we do talk about the role of new technologies, how that changed some aspects of the role. So A looks really good. Let's take a look at B, C, and D. We got B. Although jailists have many roles, many of them like teaching best. We never state that they like teaching best. Jailists have been entertaining people within their communities for centuries. We don't talk about them entertaining people. D, technology can now do some of the things jailists used to be responsible for. That's not the main idea. Okay, the main idea is introducing sort of what jailists is, how even though there's some technological change, they do continue to preserve their community's history. So A is the best answer there. In 1934, physicist Eugene Wigner posited the existence of a crystal consisting entirely of electrons in a honeycomb-like structure. The so-called Wigner crystal remained largely conjecture, however, until Feng Wang and colleagues announced in 2021 that they captured an image of one. The researchers trapped electrons between two semiconductors and then cooled the apparatus, causing the electrons to settle into a crystalline structure. By inserting an ultra-thin sheet of graphene above the crystal, the researchers obtained an impression, the first visual confirmation of the Wigner crystal. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? Well, we start out by introducing the Wigner crystal, stating how it's unable to be recreated, and then we talk about it being recreated. So we have option A, researchers have obtained the most definitive evidence to date of the existence of the Wigner crystal. That would make sense. Before, they didn't know that it existed, but there was conjecture about it, and then they were able to ultimately recreate it. So that would make sense. We got B, researchers have identified an innovative new method for working with unusual crystalline structures. Well, we don't really talk about them identifying a new innovative method, so we can get rid of B. We got C, graphene is the most important of the components required to capture an image. We never state explicitly that graphene is the most important of the components. That wouldn't make sense. We got D, it's difficult to acquire an image of a Wigner crystal because of crystalline's honeycomb structure. That's not the main idea. That might be a supporting idea, but it's not the main idea. The main idea is that researchers have obtained the most definitive evidence to date of the Wigner crystal. So our answer there would have to be A. Average number of individuals reporting directly to CEOs is the title of this. We've got average number of individuals directly reporting to CEO on the y-axis. X-axis, we have years, and then we have managers and department leaders. Let's go and go down to our text. We have, considering a large sample of companies, economics expert Maria Guadalupe, Julie Wolf, and Raghuram Rajan assessed the number of managers and leaders from different departments who reported directly to a CEO. According to the researchers, the findings suggest that across the years analyzed, there was a growing interest among CEOs in connecting with more departments in their companies. Which choice best describes data from the graph that supports the researchers' conclusion? Okay, the researchers' conclusion is ultimately that CEOs want more people to report to them. So we see that over time, we are increasing the amount of department leaders, or increasing the amount of individuals directly reporting to the CEO of department leaders and managers. Okay, they both are going to increase. We see department leaders is ultimately increasing much more, going from 3.5 to 4, all the way up to about 6.75. We see managers also increases, but not as quite as much, even though it is sort of based on a percentage, right? Going from 2 to 3 is about 50%. But over here, we see what looks probably somewhere around 75% increase. Which choice best describes data from the graph that supports researchers' conclusion? We have option A, average number of managers and department leaders reporting directly to their CEO didn't fluctuate from the 1991 to 1995 period to the 2001 to 2008 period. We know that that's not true. We know that it did change. We've got B, the average number of managers reporting directly to their CEO was the highest in 1996, 2001. Well, we want to show that there's a change over time, so we can't just really take 1 year. We've got C, average number of department leaders reporting directly to the CEO was greater than the average number of managers reporting directly to their CEO in each of the 3-period study. No, we need to talk about this increase. We've got D, average number of department leaders reporting directly to their CEO rose over the 3-period study. Yes, that'd be perfect. Our answer there would have to be D. When digging for clams, their primary food, sea otters damage the roots of eelgrass plants growing on the seafloor. Near Vancouver Island in Canada, the otter population is large and well established, yet the eelgrass meadows are healthier than those found elsewhere off Canada's coast. To explain this, conservation scientist Aaron Foster and colleagues compared the Vancouver Island meadows to meadows where otters are absent or were reintroduced only recently. Finding that Vancouver Island meadows have a more diverse gene pool than the others do, Foster hypothesized that damaged eelgrass roots increase the plant's rate of sexual reproduction. This in turn boosts genetic diversity, which benefits the meadow's health overall. Which finding, if true, would most directly undermine Foster's hypothesis. Keep in mind his hypothesis is stated at the end right here that damaged eelgrass roots increase the plant's rate of sexual reproduction. This in turn boosts genetic diversity, which benefits the meadow's health overall. Okay, so we've got option A. At some sites in the study, eelgrass meadows are found near otter populations that are small and have only been recently reintroduced. Okay, that wouldn't undermine it. We've got B. At several sites not included in the study, there are large, well-established sea otter population, but no eelgrass meadows. Well, once again, that would not undermine his hypothesis there. We've got C. At several sites not included in the study, eelgrass meadows health correlates negatively with the length of residence and size of otter populations. This one would undermine his hypothesis, and the reason why, if I scroll back up so you can see his hypothesis, he's hypothesizing that damage to these eelgrass roots, which is caused by the otters, increases the plant's rate of sexual reproduction, which in turn boosts genetic diversity, which benefits the meadow's health overall. And then if we go down here and take a look at C, we see their health would be negatively impacted negatively correlated with the length of residence and the size of otter populations. So that's a direct contradiction to essentially what Foster's hypothesis is. Okay, so C is what would actually undermine his hypothesis. Okay, if we quickly take a look at D, we have at some sites in the study, health of plants unrelated to eelgrass correlates negatively with the length of residence and size of otter populations. Well, if it's unrelated to the eelgrass, then obviously it's not going to undermine the hypothesis, so answer there's got to be C. Scholars have noted that F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings were likely influenced in part by his marriage to Zelda Fitzgerald, but many don't recognize Zelda as a writer in her own right. Indeed, Zelda authored several works herself, such as the novel Save Me the Waltz and numerous short stories. Thus, those who primarily view Zelda as an inspiration for F. Scott's writing, which choice most logically completes the text? We have option A, overlook the many other factors that motivated F. Scott to write. No. B, risk misrepresenting the full range of Zelda's contributions to literature. That would make sense because they're ignoring the fact that she produced her own works. Okay, if we take a look at C and D, we got C, may draw inaccurate conclusions about how F. Scott and Zelda viewed each other's works. No. And then D, tend to read the works of F. Scott and Zelda in an overly autobiographical light. No. Okay, answer there would be B. Among social animals that care for their young, such as chickens, monkeys, and humans, newborns appear to show an innate attraction to faces and face-like stimuli. That's good thing to underline there. We've got Elizabeth Versace and her colleagues used an image of 3 black dots arranged in the shape of eyes and a nose or mouth to test whether this trait also occurs in T tortoises, which live alone and do not engage in parental care. They found that tortoise hatchlings showed a significant preference for the image, suggesting that okay, so ultimately they're attracted to sort of this facial shape. So we've got option A, face-like stimuli are likely perceived as harmless by newborns of social species that practice parental care, but as threatening by newborns of solitary species without parental care. Let me quick go back at the text. What does it say about these tortoises? They live alone, don't engage in parental care. And then they see that they found tortoise hatchlings show a significant preference for the image. So even though they're alone, it's sort of this natural thing that even though they don't engage in parental care, they still are drawn to the faces. So we've got option A, face-like stimuli are likely perceived as harmless by newborns of social species that practice parental care, but as threatening by those without parental care. We don't see that. We actually see the opposite here. If we look at B, researchers should not assume that an innate attraction to face-like stimuli is necessarily an adaptation related to social interaction or parental care. That would make the most sense here because ultimately we see that even though these tortoises don't have parental care, they're not in sort of the social group, they still have this innate attraction to the face-like stimuli. So it shouldn't be assumed that it's an adaptation to social interaction or parental care because we see that's not the case with these turtles. So B would make the most sense. We can quickly take a look at C and D. Researchers can assume that the attraction to face-like stimuli is seen in social species that practice parental care is learned rather than innate. No, we kind of have evidence from it being innate from these turtles. We've got D, newly hatched tortoises show a stronger preference for face-like stimuli than adult ones do. We never have that anywhere in the text, so our answer there would have to be B. Compiled in the late 1500s, largely through the efforts of indigenous scribes, Cantares Mexicanos is the most important collection of poetry in classical Nahuatl, the principal language of the Aztec Empire. The poems portray Aztec society before the occupation of the empire by the army of Spain, and marginal notes in Cantares Mexicanos indicate that much of the collection's content predates the initial invasion. Nonetheless, some of the poems contain inarguable references to beliefs and customs common in Spain during this era. Thus, some scholars have concluded that, and then we have option A, well, content largely predates the invasion, which we know is supported because it says that the poems portray Aztec society before occupation of the empire by the army of Spain. Okay, so that first part makes sense. I'll put a T for true. Quinteros Mexicanos also contains additions made after the invasion. That would also make sense because we do say that some of the poems contain inarguable references to beliefs and customs common in Spain during this era, which would only happen after that invasion. So that would make sense if we take a look at B as well. Okay, I'll put a check here, but I'll quickly check B, C, and D. We have, although those who compiled Quinteros Mexicanos were fluent in Nahuatl, they had limited knowledge of the Spanish language. That wouldn't really be the conclusion you would make from that. Then we got C, before the invasion by Spain, the poets of Aztec Empire borrowed from literary traditions of other societies. Once again, that's not a conclusion we can make based on that. And then we've got D. The references to beliefs and customs in Spain should be attributed to a coincidental resemblance between the societies. Once again, that's not what we would be able to conclude based on what we have sort of been given in this text. Okay, so our best answer would have to be A, both parts of A are true, so our answer is A. In a study of the cognitive abilities of white-faced monkeys, researchers neglected to control for the physical difficulty of the tasks they used to evaluate the monkeys. The cognitive abilities of the monkeys given problems requiring little dexterity, such as sliding a panel to retrieve food, were judged by the same criteria as were the monkeys given physically demanding problems, such as unscrewing a bottle and inserting a straw. The results of the study, therefore, and then we have what most logically completes this. Okay, ultimately keep in mind here that researchers neglected to control for the physical difficulty of the tasks they used to evaluate the monkeys. All right, so we've got option A could suggest that there are differences in cognitive ability among the monkeys, even though such differences may not actually exist. That would make sense since they neglected to control for the physical difficulty of the tasks. Okay, therefore, it would suggest that the cognitive abilities may show differences that don't actually exist based on the test results. Obviously, since this test isn't really going to be accurate, since they have different level of difficulties for these tests. So A makes the most sense here. We can quick take a look at B, C, and D, read those as well. Are useful for identifying tasks that the monkeys lack the cognitive ability to perform, but not for identifying tasks that the monkeys can perform. That wouldn't make sense for the results of the study. Okay, therefore, we need to ultimately show that they're really not going to be meaningful because these tasks are of different difficulties. We got option C, should not be taken as indicative of the cognitive abilities of any monkey species other than the C, immature. No. And then D reveals that about the monkey's cognitive abilities when solving artificial problems, when solving problems encountered in the wild. Once again, the big thing here is that these are tasks that are very different. They require different sort of physical abilities to solve. Therefore, our answer would have to be A. To survive when water is scarce, embryos inside African turquoise killifish eggs blank a dormant state. Okay, it looks like we're back onto the writing section, or we are onto the writing section now. Which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Okay, so we've got enter, to enter, having entered, entering. Okay, so we're looking for verb tense, match the number to our subject as well. To survive when water is scarce, embryos inside African turquoise killifish eggs. Okay, so these embryos are our subject. So embryos enter a dormant state. Keep in mind, this is going in with survive as well, right? They enter a dormant state known as dispause. In this state, embryonic development is paused for as long as this, longer than lifespan. Okay, so in this case, we're matching to our subject, embryos, and then we have to have the correct tense as well. So answer would have to be A, enter. We can go and move on. Formed in 1967 to foster political and economic stability within the Asia-Pacific region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations was originally made up of 5 members: Thailand, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. By the end of the 1990s, the organization doubled its initial membership. Okay, we get that it has to be some sort of double from all of these. In this case, let's go back. Let's find our text. We've got by the end of the 1990s, the organization had doubled its initial membership. Okay, we know this because it was already formed in 1967. This is all in the past tense. It's already happened. So by the end of the 1990s, the organization had doubled its initial membership. Okay, this has already occurred. So our answer there would have to be answer choice B. The intense pressure found in the deep ocean can affect the structure of proteins in fish's cells, distorting the protein's shape. The chemical TMAO counters this effect, ensuring that proteins retain their original blank. And then we'll have, looks like another independent clause. TMAO is found in high concentrations. Okay, so that'll be another independent clause. Up here, we have this participle phrase that's going back and describing the chemical TMO counters this effect, okay, ensuring. So ultimately, we're gonna have to split up at the end of this participle phrase. We'll need something that is splitting the independent clause here from the next one. So we've got all these options. We're going to need, if we have a comma, we need a fanboy. This would also be a run-on. Okay, so the only answer that's not a run-on sentence then would be answer choice A. Food and the sensation of taste are central to MT's novels. In the Book of Salt, for example, the exiled character of Bin connects to his native Saijan through the food he prepares. While in Bitter in the Mouth, the character of Linda blank a form of synesthesia, whereby the words she hears evokes taste. So we've got something with experience. Okay, so let's go and take a look in the book. This, for example, the exiled character connects his native Sagan through the food he prepares while in the bitter of the mouth. The character of Linda experiences. Okay, we need to maintain the parallelism. Okay, we've got exiled character connects to his native blank through the food he prepares. While in this, character of Linda experiences. Okay, so our answer would have to be C, maintain that parallelism. That's the correct tense and everything, so our answer would be C. Inventor John Friedman created a prototype of the first flexible straw by inserting a screw into a paper straw and using dental floss, binding the straw tightly around the blank screws thread. Okay, so binding the straw tightly around the screws threads. Well, and then we have, that'll just be the end. Okay, so when the floss and screw are removed, then we go on and talk about stuff. Okay, so the screws threads. Well, ultimately we need to know if it's one screw or multiple by inserting a screw. So it's one screw. Okay, therefore we can get rid of B and we can get rid of D as well. Okay, the screws threads, the threads do belong to the screw. Okay, it is one singular screw. Now keep in mind threads doesn't own anything either. So we can actually get rid of A and D as well based on that. We see our answer's got to be C, right? We have one screw. It is possessive of the threads. The thread doesn't possess anything, so our answer would have to be C. In her analysis of Edith Wharton's The House of Mirth, scholar Candace Wade observes that the novel depicts the upper classes of New York society as consumed by the appetite of a soulless materialism. Okay, that'll be the end of that quote. Blank, an apt assessment given that the House of Mirth is set during the Gilded Age. Okay, so ultimately we wouldn't want to put an and there because we want to refer back to that quotation. So we can get rid of A and B. So then we have materialism. We need to end the quote. And then we have an apt assessment given that the House of Mirth is set during the Gilded Age, a period marked by this. Okay, so this apt assessment is going to refer back to this quote. So we do need to offset that with a comma, okay, because it is describing that quote that we had just given. So our answer would have to be C. To humans, it does not appear that the golden orb weaver spider uses camouflage to capture its prey. Okay, that's an independent clause. And then we have rather, the brightly colored anarchid seems to wait conspicuously in the center of its large circular web for insects to approach. Well, this is also an independent clause. We have two independent clauses. We need to connect them. Okay. This rather, we need to determine where that should also go. So we have to humans. It does not appear that the golden orb spider uses camouflage to capture its prey. All right. That right there is on its own. Okay. Rather than should come right here. Okay. Rather should be included in this independent clause. So if you look at our options, A is a run-on sentence, B also a run-on sentence, and then between C and D, we need to determine where that rather needs to go. We know rather needs to come after that semicolon, okay, because it needs to be included with that second independent clause, so our answer would have to be D for 26. In Death Valley National Park's Racetrack Playa, a flat, dry lake bed are 162 rocks, some weighing less than a pound, but others almost 700 pounds that move periodically from place to place, seemingly of their own volition. Racetrack-like trails in the blank, okay, and then we have Playa's sediment, okay, is this possessive? Well, Playa is singular. We see that up here. So therefore we can get rid of D. Does Playa own sediment? It does. It's the Playa's sediment. It is possessive. So from there we've got B and C. Differences are rock versus rocks. Racetrack-like trails in the Playa's sediment mark the rock's mysterious migration. Okay, rocks is plural and it does have possession over the mysterious migration. It is the mysterious migration of the rock, so it is possessive there. So we can go ahead and get rid of B. Our answer would have to be C for 27. Question 28. In crafting her fantasy fiction, Nigerian-born British author Helen Oyemi has drawn inspiration from the classic 19th century fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. Her 2014 novel, Boy, Snow, Bird, for instance, is a complex retelling of the story of Snow White, while her 2019 novel, and then we have Gingerbread, offers a delicious twist on the classic tale of Hansel and Gretel. Okay, so do we need any punctuation after Gingerbread? Well, if we start from the top, we've got her 2014 novel, Boy, Snow, Bird, for instance, is a complex retelling of the story of Snow White. That's an independent clause. And then we have, her 2019 novel, Gingerbread, offers a delicious twist on the classic tale of Hansel and Gretel. There's no need for any sort of punctuation there. Okay, you really can't add any of these. Okay, it's just not necessary. You would just want to leave no punctuation there, right? Her 2019 novel, and so on, is ultimately just making this into a complex sentence. So all you need there is nothing. So just the word gingerbread. So answer there is C. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. NASA uses rovers, large remote vehicles with wheels, to explore the surface of Mars. NASA's rovers can't explore regions inaccessible to wheeled vehicles. Rovers are also heavy, making them difficult to land on the planet's surface. Microprobes, robotic probes that weigh as little as 50 milligrams, could be deployed virtually anywhere on the surface of Mars. Microprobes have been proposed as an alternative to rovers. The student wants to explain an advantage of microprobes. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Option A, despite being heavy, NASA's rovers can land successfully on the surface of Mars. No. B, microprobes, which weigh as little as 50 milligrams, could explore areas of Mars that are inaccessible to NASA's heavy wheeled rovers. Yes, that would make sense. If we take a look at C, NASA currently uses its rovers on Mars, but microbes have been proposed as an alternative. No, we need to talk about an advantage. And then D, though they are different sizes, both microbes and rovers can be used to explore the surface of Mars. We want to talk specifically about the advantage of microbes, which would be answer choice B is the only one that does that. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. AG was awarded the 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature. G was born in Zanzibar, East Africa, and currently lives in the United Kingdom. Many readers have singled out G's 1994 book Paradise for praise. Paradise is a historical novel about events that occurred in colonial East Africa. A student wants to introduce Paradise to an audience unfamiliar with the novel and its author. Okay, so we need to introduce the book to an audience unfamiliar with the novel and its author. So we probably want some information about both the novel and the author. So we have option A, which is AG, who wrote Paradise and later was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, was born in East Africa and currently lives in the UK. Okay, so we do introduce AG well, but we don't actually introduce the book well at all. We just mentioned the name. So that one probably isn't a great option. I'll just kind of leave it sort of with 1/ for now before we fully exit out. We've got B, many readers have singled out AG's 1994 book Paradise, historical novel about East Africa for praise. Okay, they don't introduce who AG is at all in that case. Then we look at C, a much praised historical novel about colonial East Africa, Paradise. We introduced the book well, was written by AG, winner of the 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature. This introduces both the book and the author pretty much perfectly. So C looks really good. We get rid of A because obviously it doesn't actually introduce the book very well. It just mentions the name. And that's really just in context of who the author is. So it is really, really not introducing the book at all. And then we look at C. That one looked good. So we can go take a look at D. Paradise is a historical novel about events that occurred in colonial East Africa, AG's homeland. We don't introduce him at all. Okay, so that wouldn't make sense. Okay, so our best answer there would have to be answer choice C. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Ulaanbaatar is the capital of Mongolia. The city's population is 900,000 something. Ulaanbaatar contains about 32% of Mongolia's population. Hanoi is the capital of Vietnam. The city's population is 7.7 million. Hanoi contains 8.14% of Vietnam's population. Which choice most effectively uses information from the given census to emphasize the relative sizes of the two capitals' populations? Okay, so we're comparing the two capitals' populations, comparing the relative sizes, and we want to emphasize the relative sizes. So that's where the focus should be. Okay, so we've got option A, which is Mongolia's capital is Ulaanbaatar, which has 907,000 people. Vietnam's capital is Hanoi, which has 7.7 million people. There's no comparison there. Okay, we want to emphasize the relative sizes of the two capitals' populations. And at that point, we're really just listing out what the capital is, what the population is, but not talking about the relative sizes. That's the key part that A is missing. If you look at B, populations of the capitals of Mongolia and Vietnam are this and this respectively, but once again, we're not giving any sort of focus to the relative size, which is that sort of 8.14% of Vietnam's population and 32% of the other places' population. Then we've got C, even though Hanoi population of 7.7 million is larger than Ulaanbaatar with a population of 907,000. Ulaanbaatar accounts for more of its country's population. Yes, that makes sense, right? We knew that Ulaanbaatar is 32% of its country's population. Keep in mind here, we are also talking about the two capitals, which we do state both of them. Okay, we give their population. We talk about the relative sizes in this part right here. Okay, so C looks really good. We'll take a quick look at D. Comparing Vietnam and Mongolia, 7.7 million is 8.14% of Vietnam's population, and 907,802 is 32% of Mongolia's. We don't mention the capitals there at all, and we know that in our question we do say that we want to emphasize the relative sizes of the two capitals' populations. We do give the number, but we never actually state what it represents, right? We just state that it's this percent of Vietnam's population, but we don't even mention that that population is from the capital. So D would have to be wrong, C would be our right answer there. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. One of history's greatest libraries was the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, Iraq. It was founded in the 8th century with the goal of preserving all the world's knowledge. Scholars at the House of Wisdom collected ancient and contemporary texts from Greece, India, and elsewhere and translated them into Arabic. Writings included those of the Greek philosopher Aristotle and the Indian mathematician Aryabhata. The House of Wisdom used Chinese paper-making technology to create paper versions to be studied and shared. The student wants to explain the House of Wisdom preserved, how the House of Wisdom preserved the world's knowledge, which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal. Option A, House of Wisdom was known for bringing together knowledge from around the world, including from Greece, India, and China. That's a pretty good summary of sort of how they preserved the world's knowledge. Or actually, no, it's not, because it's just saying what it's known for. It's not actually saying how they preserved it. So A is actually bad. Okay, let's take a look at B. Founded in Iraq in 8th century, the House of Wisdom employed many scholars as translators. That's really not explaining how they preserved the world's knowledge, so I'm going to get rid of B as well. We need to focus on this word how, okay? We got C, writings from the Greek philosopher Aristotle and the Indian mathematician Aryabhata were preserved at the House of Wisdom. That's not very good either. If we take a look at D, the House of Wisdom collected writings from different countries. Okay, that's explaining what they did or how they did it, and created paper versions in Arabic to be studied and shared. Yeah, that's explaining how they preserve the world's knowledge. Okay, key word there being how. Answer there would have to be D. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. British musicians John Lennon and Paul McCartney shared writing credit for numerous Beatles songs. Many Lennon-McCartney songs were actually written by either Lennon or McCartney, not by both. The exact authorship of specific works of many Beatles songs, such as the verse for In My Life, is disputed. Mark Glickman, Jason Brown, and Ryan Song used statistical methods to analyze the musical content of Beatles songs. They concluded that there is an 18.9% probability that McCartney wrote the verse for In My Life, stating that the verse is consistent with Lennon's songwriting style. The student wants to make a generalization about the kind of study conducted by Glickman, Brown, and Song. Okay, so always pay attention on questions like this to basically what's stated right here, okay, which will always pretty much be what your prompt is. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? All right, so student wants to make a generalization about the kind of study. Well, ultimately, it looks like this is a statistical analysis, so we're just kind of looking for something about that. We've got option A, based on statistical analysis. Okay, that's perfect. A perfect intro, not necessarily a perfect answer choice. We'll keep reading. Glickman, Brown, and Song claim that John Lennon wrote the verse In My Life. That actually isn't really focusing on the kind of study necessarily. It does mention it briefly. We'll see if there's anything that mentions it in more depth. We've got B. There is only an 18.9% probability that Paul McCartney wrote the verse for In My Life. John Lennon is more likely the author. No, that doesn't mention sort of how they did this study. C, it's likely that John Lennon, not Paul McCartney, wrote the verse. No, researchers have used statistical methods to address questions of authorship within the fields of music. Okay, so I'm between A and D. Let me go back up to my prompt. Student wants to make a generalization about the kind of study conducted by Glickman, Brown, and Song. If we take a look at D, we've got researchers have used statistical methods to address quotations of authorship within the fields of music. Okay, that is making a generalization about that kind of study. Okay, so that would make the most sense. If we take a look at A, we're not actually making a generalization. We're still keeping it specific to this one study, okay, not to that kind of study. We're not making a generalization. We're keeping it specific in A. So D would have to be our correct answer there. We make that generalization about the kind of study that was conducted in this case. So D would be our answer. The Mool Bone, a 1930 play written by Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, is perhaps the best known of the few examples of blank in literature. Most writers prefer working alone, and given that working together cost Hurston and Hughes their friendship, it is not hard to see why. I would guess that this is something along the lines of collaboration. Yeah, we see that's on option C. Okay, we're talking about them working together here. And we know that we talked about them working together there. Okay, giving that working together cost them their friendships. We know that it's working together. Another word for that's collaboration, obviously. So C would have to be our right answer there. We can go move on to our next question. The process of mechanically recycling plastics is often considered blank because of its environmental impact and loss of material quality that often occurs. But chemist has developed a cleaner process of chemical recycling that converts superabsorbent polymers from diapers into a desirable reusable adhesive. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? All right, well, here it sounds like we have something with a negative connotation. We have the process of mechanically recycling plastics is often considered option A, resilient. No. Option B, inadequate. It doesn't sound great. Option C, dynamic because of the environmental impact. No. C or D, satisfactory because of the environmental impact and loss of material quality that often occurs. No. Inadequate would make the most sense here, right? Because we say that it's inadequate. Then we go on to use a contrast, a but, and then we talk about a cleaner process, so an improvement. Okay, so in order for us to make a real big improvement on something like we have here, we need to have something that's inadequate in the first place. So B makes the most sense there for number 2, and B will be our answer. Interruptions in the supply chain for microchips used in personal electronics have challenged an economist's assertion that retailers can expect robust sales growth of those devices in the coming months. The delays are unlikely to blank her projection entirely, but will almost certainly extend its time frame. Okay, so I would think that it's unlikely to mess up her projection entirely, but will extend the time frame. So it won't completely mess up the projection, but it will extend sort of the time frame. We got option A, dispute wouldn't really make sense there. Withdraw wouldn't make sense. Underscore her projection wouldn't make sense. Invalidate the projection, that would make the most sense, right? It's unlikely to invalidate the projection entirely, but will extend its time frame. Okay, so our answer would have to be D. For her 2021 art installation anthem, Woot Zhang joined forces with singer and composer Beverly Glenn Copeland to produce a piece that critics found truly blank. They praised Zhang for creatively transforming a museum rotunda into a dynamic exhibit by projecting filmed images of Glenn Copeland onto a massive 84-foot curtain and filling the space with the sounds of his and other voices singing. Which choice best completes this? Okay, so ultimately we're giving a lot of praise, so they found it truly what? Not restrained, not inexplicable because they kind of go on to explain it. And then we have between mystifying and inventive. So they praised her for creatively. Okay, so this is something new, it sounds like, that hasn't been done before, transforming a rotunda into a dynamic exhibit. Okay, so they produced a piece that critics found truly, I would say inventive would be the best there, right? Ultimately, because we're talking about something that's creative, right? It's a new thing that's happening, it hasn't happened before, so inventive would make the most sense. There's really not any sort of evidence necessarily for mystifying. Obviously, you have the filling space with the sound of his and others' voices singing, but once again, that wouldn't really be a characterization as mystifying. We would need much more evidence for that. It would be a very, very large reach to try to say that the answer there would be mystifying. Okay, it would be inventive. That's what has the most textual support for it. Some scientists have suggested that mammals in the Mesozoic era were not a very blank group, but paleontologist ZXL research suggests that early mammals living in the shadow of dinosaurs weren't all ground-dwelling insectivores. Fossils of various plant-eating mammals have been found in China, including species like VD, which Liu says could glide like a flying squirrel. Which choice best completes? Okay, so we have, I would assume this is something like diverse. And the reason why is because we go on to say that they were not all ground-dwelling insectivores. And then we talk about sort of herbivores and some other stuff. So we see, okay, diverse is an option. Okay, so that'd be perfect. Obscure wouldn't make sense. Predatory wouldn't make sense. Neither would localized. We go on to talk about species that are not ground-dwelling and talk about some sort of some plant-eating mammals, including flying squirrels, which is obviously very different than what came before it. So answer C for number 5. The following text is adapted from Gwendolyn Bennett's 1926 poem, Street Lamps in Early Spring. Night wears a garment, all velvet soft, all violet blue, and over her face she draws a veil as shimmering, fine as floating dew, and here and there in the back of her hair, the subtle hands of night move slowly into her gem-starred light. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the test? Okay, so we basically are talking about night in sort of a way, sort of a personification of it wearing a garment, which is something a human would do. And then we talk about how over her face she draws a veil. I would guess that that's sort of a symbol for darkness. As simmering fine, a floating dew here and there in the back of her hair. Subtle hands of night move slowly with their gem-starred light. So this is kind of, I would say, time. And then we go into gem-starred light, so kind of referring to the stars. So we've got option A, presents an alternating descriptions of night in a rural area and in a city. I don't really see any sort of evidence for that. So I'd drop A. If we look at B, it sketches an image of nightfall, then an image of sunrise. Okay, nightfall, shimmering shine as floating dew, and here and there in the black of her hair, the subtle hands of night move slowly with their gem-starred light. I don't really see any sort of image of sunrise at the end either. If you look at C, it makes an extended comparison of night to being a human. That would make a lot of sense, right? Black of her hair, night wears a garment, something a human would do. Over her face draws a veil. Okay, so an extended extended comparison of night to being a human would make the most sense. Let's take a look at D as well. Portrays how the night changes from one season of the year to the next. We don't have any sort of changing of seasons there, so C would be perfect. According to historian Vicky L. Ruiz, Mexican-American women made crucial contributions to the labor movement during World War II. At the time, food processing companies entered into contracts to supply United States Armed Forces with canned goods, increased production. Quotas conferred greater bargaining power on the company's employees, many of whom were Mexican-American women. Then we have employees insisted on more favorable benefits, and employers who were anxious to fulfill contracts complied. Thus, labor activism became a platform for Mexican-American women to assert their agency. Okay, what best describes the function of the underlying portion in the text as a whole? Got option A, elaborates on a claim about labor relations in a particular industry made earlier in the text. What we do see that we have above that, increased production quotas conferred greater bargaining power on the company's employees, many of whom were Mexican-American women. And then we say employees insisted. Okay, so we're giving an example of their bargaining power. So it elaborates on a claim about labor relations, which is that they had more bargaining power in this industry made earlier in the text. That looks really good. Let's take a look at B, C, and D very quickly. Offers an example of a trend in World War II era economy discussed earlier in the text. And no, we've got C. It notes a possible exception to the historical narrative of labor activism sketched earlier. We don't have an exception there. We have sort of a continuation of what we've been describing. D, provides further details about the identities of the workers. No, so our answer would have to be answer choice A. The following text is adapted from Zora Neale Hurston's 1921 short story, John Redding Goes to Sea. John is a child who lives in a town in the woods. Perhaps 10-year-old John was puzzling to the folks there in the Florida woods, for he was an imaginative child and fond of daydreams. The St. John River flowed a scarce 300 feet from his back door. On its banks at this point grow numerous palms, luxurious magnolias and bay trees. On the bosom of the stream float millions of delicately colored hyacinths. John Redding loved to wander down to the water's edge and, casting in dry twigs, watch them sail downstream to Jacksonville, the sea, the wide world, and he wanted to follow them. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined text or the underlined sentence in the text as a whole? Option A provides an extended description of the location that John likes to visit. Not really. The part that is most interesting to me about that last sentence is the end. He tossed them into the sea, the wide world, and he wanted to follow them. So he's adventurous, basically. We've got option B, reveals that some residents of Johnstown are confused by his behavior. No. C, illustrates the uniqueness of John's imagination compared to the imaginations of other children. We don't compare him to other children. D, it suggests that John longs to experience a larger life outside the Florida woods. Yes, that idea of exploration. So D would be our answer there. The following text is adapted from Oscar Wilde's 1891 novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray is taking his first look at a portrait that Hallward has painted of him. Dorian passed listlessly in front of his picture and turned towards it. When he saw it, he drew back, and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes as if he had recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. All right, so we've got options. According to the text, what's true about Dorian? He wanted to know about Hallward. He wants to know Hallward's opinion of the portrait. No. B, he is delighted by what he sees in the portrait. That looks like it has very strong textual support. C, he prefers portraits to other types of painting. We never state that, I don't believe. D, he is uncertain of Hallward's talent as an artist. No. Okay. B, this pretty much his whole thing is just about how delighted he is to see his portrait. Voters' political orientation, level of political information, and probability of voting. We've got probability of voting on the y-axis. If we scroll down, we've got voters' political orientation, 1 being strong Democrat, 4 independent, 7 strong Republican. Then we have low information and high information. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our text. Economists Kerwin Kofi Charles and Melvin Stevens Jr. investigated a variety of factors that influence voter turnout in the United States. Using survey data, they revealed whether respondents voted in national elections and how knowledgeable respondents are about politics. Charles and Stevens claimed that the likelihood of voting is driven in part by the voters' confidence in their assessments of candidates. Essentially, the more informed voters are about politics, the more confident they are about evaluating whether candidates share their views, and thus the more likely they are to vote. Our answer choices. We have which choice best describes data in the graph that supports their claim. Okay, so let's go ahead and look for support for their claim in the graph. Okay, so we would be looking ultimately for high information to be higher than low information across the bar. We see that high information is greater than low information across all of these sort of political affiliations, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or independent. The probability of voting looks like is right around 10%, up to possibly as high as maybe 20%, 30% higher in these cases. So anywhere from, it looks like, maybe that's about 10% to 30% higher in all these cases is what would be the best evidence, in my opinion. So let's go ahead and go over to our answer choice. So we got option A. At each point on the political orientation scale, high information voters were more likely than low information voters to vote. That's true. It does support their claim that people who are more informed are more likely to vote. We got option B, only low information voters who identify as independents have a voting probability below 50%. No. C, the closer that low information voters are to the ends of the political scale, more likely they are to vote. We want to focus on the fact that it's at all levels or all orientations politically, Democrat, Republican, and independent. And then we have D, high information voters are more likely to identify as strong Democrats or strong Republicans than low information. No, that's not part of his claim. His claim is that at every sort of part of the political orientation scale, high information voters were more likely to vote than low information voters were. So answer choice A is perfect. Spider population count. We got spider count, y-axis, x-axis. We got day of experiment, and then we got no lizards and lizards. So let's go ahead and take a look now. We got to investigate the effect of lizard predation on spider populations. A student in biology class placed spiders in 2 enclosures, one with lizards and one without, and tracked the number of spiders in the enclosures for 30 days. The student concluded that the reduction in the spider population count in the enclosure with lizards by day 30 was entirely attributable to the presence of the lizards, which choice best describes data from the graph that weakened that student's conclusion. So he's stating that the decline in spider population is entirely due to lizards. We see that in the one with no lizards, however. The one with no lizards also has a decline. It's not quite as steep as that has the one that is with lizards, but that spider population does still decline in both. So it's not entirely attributable, which is what the student said. So if we go down, we've got option A, the spider population count was the same in both enclosures on day 1. B, spider population count was substantially declined by day 30 in the enclosure without lizards. Yes, that's what would ultimately weaken the student's conclusion the most. We can take a look at C and D as well real quick. Largest decline in spider population count in the enclosure with lizards occurred from day 1 to day 10. No. And then D, spider population count on day 30 was lower in the enclosure with lizards than that enclosure without lizards. No. Okay, ultimately the one that is going to weaken the student's conclusion there would be answer choice B. Archaeologist Petra Viglova anthropologist Zeno Li and their colleagues investigated the domestication of farm animals in China during the Bronze Age, approximately 2000 to 1000 BCE. By analyzing the chemical composition of the bones of the sheep, goats, and cattle from this area, the team determined wild plants made up the bulk of the sheep and goats' diets, while the cattle's diets consisted largely of millet, a crop cultivated by humans. The team concluded that cattle were likely raised closer to human settlements, whereas sheep and goats were allowed to roam farther away, which finding, if true, would most strongly support the team's conclusion. Option A, analysis of animal bones showed that the cattle's diet also consisted of wheat, which humans widely cultivated in China during the Bronze Age. That would support the conclusion. We'll see if there's anything else that is stronger support. We got B, further investigation of sheep and goat bones revealed that their diets consisted of small portions of millet as well. That would weaken the conclusion. We got option C, cattle diets require large amounts of food and a greater variety of nutrients than do sheep's and goats' diets. So that would not strongly support the conclusion. D, diets of goats and sheep and cattle were found to vary based on what the farmers in each Bronze Age settlement could grow. That would not support their conclusion. Okay, answer there would have to be A. Mosasaurs were large marine reptiles that lived in the late Cretaceous period, approximately 100 million to 66 million years ago. Selena Suarez, Alberto Perez Huerta, T. Lynn Harold Jr. examined oxygen-18 isotopes in mosasaur tooth enamel in order to calculate likely mosasaur body temperatures and determined that mosasaurs were endothermic. That is, they used internal metabolic processes to maintain a stable body temperature in a variety of ambient temperatures. Suarez, Perez, Huerta, and Harrell claimed that endothermy would have enabled mosasaurs to include relatively cold polar waters in their range, which finding, if true, would most directly support their claim. Option A, mosasaurs' likely body temperatures are easier to determine from tooth enamel oxygen-18 isotope data than the body temperatures of non-endothermic Cretaceous marine reptiles are. That's pretty irrelevant. If we take a look at B, fossils of both mesosaurs and non-endothermic marine reptiles have been found in roughly equal numbers in regions known to be near the poles during the late Cretaceous period, though in lower concentrations than elsewhere. Once again, that's not really going to support their claim. We've got option C. Several mesosaur fossils have been found in regions known to be near the poles during the late Cretaceous period, while relatively few fossils of non-endothermic marine reptiles have been found in those locations. That would make sense because since they're endothermic, they're able to control their own body temperatures basically just by burning calories, whereas the non-endothermics can't. So that would make sense there. If we take a look at D, during the late Cretaceous period, seawater temperatures were likely higher throughout the Mesosaur's range, including near the poles, than seawater temperatures at the same latitudes are today. No, that would, I believe, contradict the evidence. So answer there would have to be C. That's the only one that's supporting. I believe it was their claim or maybe their conclusion. What is it? Support their claim. Yeah. Answer choice C is the only one that does that. Researchers hypothesized that a decline in the population of dusky sharks near the mid-Atlantic coast of North America led to a decline in the population of eastern oysters in the region. Since we have a hypothesis here, I'm going to go ahead and underline it and I'll mark it with an H. All right, we've got dusky sharks do not typically consume eastern oysters, but do consume cow-nose rays, which are the main predators of oysters. So we have this relationship where dusky sharks are going to consume cow-nose rays, which consume the eastern oysters. So we have predator, prey, predator, prey. So we've got which finding, if true, would most directly support the hypothesis. We've got option A, declines in the regional abundance of dusky sharks. Prey other than cow-nose rays are associated with regional declines in dusky shark abundance. That wouldn't have any sort of support for the hypothesis. We got B, eastern oyster abundance tends to be greater in areas with both dusky sharks and cow-nose rays than in areas with only dusky sharks. Well, if we have greater oyster population in areas with their predators than in areas without their predators, then obviously, okay, so we've got greater eastern oyster abundance in areas where they have predators than in areas where they don't have predators. That wouldn't make any sense. Okay, that wouldn't provide support for the hypothesis. So B would be wrong. Let's take a look at C. Consumption of eastern oysters by cow-nose rays in the region substantially increased before the regional decline in dusky shark abundance. Okay, once again, if you have consumption of the oysters increasing before you get a decline in the abundance of the dusky sharks, then there's no real room to make any sort of causal relationship there, or even really, you can't make a causal relationship at that point. So C wouldn't make sense. We can't provide support with the hypothesis with that. Let's take a look at D. Cow-nose rays have increased in regional abundance as dusky sharks have decreased in regional abundance. Okay, so we've got ultimately, I'm just going to draw out the chart so you guys understand this. Okay, so we have sharks as S, cow-nose rays as C, and then you have the oysters as O. Okay, we see that if our cow-nose rays are increasing in regional abundance, for this to happen, okay, our shark population is decreasing, well, that's going to cause our oyster population to decrease, which is ultimately what our hypothesis is. This chart right here is pretty much our whole hypothesis. Okay, and we see that gets supported in answer choice D. So D has to be our answer there. Political scientists who favor the traditional view of voter behavior claim that voting in an election does not change a voter's attitude toward the candidates in that election. Okay, I've got a claim, so I'm just gonna mark that with a C. Focusing on each U.S. presidential election from 76 to 90, Abonye, Washington, and SM tested this claim by distinguishing between subjects who had just become old enough to vote, around half of whom actually voted, and otherwise similar subjects who were slightly too young to vote, and thus none of whom voted. Washington and M compared the attitudes of the groups of subjects toward the winning candidate 2 years after the election, which finding from W and M's study, if true, would most directly weaken the claim made by people who favor traditional view of voter behavior. The traditional view being that, if we go up here, voting in an election does not change a voter's attitude toward the candidates in that election. So let's go ahead and go down to our options. We've got A, subjects' attitude toward the winning candidate 2 years after a given election were strongly predicted by subjects' general political orientation, regardless of whether the subjects were old enough to vote at the time. No, we ultimately know that we need to base this on a subject who did vote versus a subject who did not vote. We have B, subjects who were not old enough to vote in a given election held significantly more positive attitudes toward the winning candidate 2 years later than they held at the time of election. Once again, we need to focus on who they voted for. It can't just be sort of the winner. We've got C, subjects who voted in a given election held significantly more polarized attitudes toward the winning candidate 2 years later than did subjects who were not old enough to vote in that election. All right, so the key thing here is that we have polarized attitudes. This is important because it swings both ways. Option B was just about toward the, if we see here, right here, positive. Okay, more positive attitudes. All right, the key thing is that it's polarized, which means that if I vote for someone and they win, I'm even more, what does it say? Candidate 2 years later than they did, more significant. Yeah. So if I vote for someone and they win, right, I'm going to be even more sort of attached to them or in favor of them. And if I vote for someone and they lose, I would be even more polarized. So I'd be even more against the person who beat them, and I'd be even more for them, even if polarized towards the winning candidate. Okay, so if I vote for someone and they lose, I'd be even more against whoever beat them. If I vote for someone and they win, I would be even more for that person. Okay, so C looks really good. Let's take a look at D. 2 years after a given election, subjects who voted and subjects who were not old enough to vote were significantly more likely to express negative attitudes than positive attitudes toward the winning candidate in that election. Once again, that's just the people who voted and didn't vote getting sort of the same outcomes. That wouldn't provide what we got. It wouldn't weaken the claim that is made by the traditional view. Okay, what does weaken that claim made by the traditional view is answer choice C, that it becomes more polarized based on who you voted for. Power conversion efficiency of lowest and highest performing spin-coated and spray-coated electron transport layers. We got power conversion efficiency y-axis. Then we got lowest performing, highest performing. Let's take a look at our text. We've got perovskite solar cells convert light into electricity more efficiently than earlier kinds of solar cells, and manufacturing advances have recently made them commercially attractive. One limitation of the cells, however, has to do with their electron transport layer, ETL, through which absorbed electrons must pass. Often the ETL is applied through a process called spin coating, but such ETLs are fairly inefficient at converting input power to output power. Andre Taylor and colleagues tested a novel spray coating method for applying ETL. The team produced ETLs of various thicknesses and concluded that spray coating holds promise for improving the power conversion efficiency of ETLs and perovskite cells. So we have a conclusion, so we'll want to pay attention to that. I'll mark that with a C for conclusion. Okay, and that conclusion is that spray coating holds promise for improving power conversion efficiency. Let's take a look at our graph then. We've got spray coating is in gray, spin coating is in black. We know spray coating, based on that conclusion, should be higher in both the highest and lowest performing cases, which we see it is. Okay, if we go and draw those lines over, we see it's obviously going to be higher in both. Even the highest performing of the spin coating is still less than the lowest performing of the spray coating. Okay, so obviously the spray coating is working. That conclusion is supported by the text. Let's go and take a look at our question now. So let me go ahead and bring that up. So which choice best describes data from the graph that supports Taylor and colleagues' conclusion? We have option A, both the ETL applied through spin coating and the ETL applied through spray coating showed a power conversion efficiency greater than 10% at their lowest performing thicknesses. We need to actually compare them. We can't just say that they're both greater than 10%. B, lowest performing ETL. Okay, so lowest performing ETL applied through a spray coating had a higher power conversion efficiency than the highest performing ETL applied through a spin coating. Yes, that's perfect evidence. That's obviously going to support their conclusion. We can take a quick look at C and D as well, show why they are wrong. C, the highest performing ETL applied through spray coating showed a power conversion efficiency of approximately 13%. Okay, keep in mind this is highest performing spray coating. We've got, well, the highest performing applied through spin coating showed a power conversion efficiency of approximately 11%. Well, this isn't even accurate according to the data, so we can get rid of it just based on that. Okay, so not accurate according to data. Next thing we can do is we can take a look at answer choice D. There's a substantial difference in power conversion between the lowest and highest performing ETL as applied through spray coating. Well, we need to ultimately compare that to the spin coating, so our answer there's got to be B. While attending school in New York City in the 1980s, Akwai Mwozer encountered few works by African artists in expositions, despite New York's reputation as one of the best places to view contemporary art from around the world. According to an arts journalist later in his career, As a renowned curator and art historian, Unweiser sought to remedy this deficiency not by focusing solely on modern African artists, but by showing how their work fits into the larger context of global modern art and art history. Okay, so here is ultimately what looks like is going to be our focus. Okay, so not by focusing solely on modern African artists, but by showing how their works fit into the larger context of global modern art and art history. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the journalist's claim, right? The claim we kind of just underlined above. So let's go ahead and go down, see what we got. Option A, as a curator of this place in Germany, he organized a retrospective of Ghanaian sculptor El Anwanse's work entitled El Anwanse Triumph at Scale, one of the largest art exhibitions devoted to a black artist in Europe's history. Well, that's not situating in the larger context of global modern art, so we can get rid of A. If we look at B, in the exposition post-war, art between the Pacific and the Atlantic, 1945 to 1965, Unweiser and curator Katie Siegel brought works by African artists such as Melon Gatana, I'm just going to say N, together with pieces by major figures from other countries like U.S. artist Andy Warhol and Mexico's David Sigueros. Okay, so ultimately, we're talking about other artists around the world, right? Mexico, U.S. And then obviously we're bringing in the works from African artists as well. So we're situating it in the global modern art and art history. Okay, art history, as we can see, this is a historical period. Talking about post-war. So B, extremely strong. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at C and D as well. So we got C, Unweiser's work as curator of the 2001 exhibitions, The Short Century, Independence and Liberation Movements in Africa. And then he showed African movements for independence from European colonial powers following Second World War. But it doesn't look like we talk about sort of situating it in the global scale or the global frame of things. And then if we look at D as well, once again, it doesn't look like there that we're situating it within the global frame at all either. Okay, so our answer there would have to be B. That's the only one that puts it in the larger context of global modern art and art history. So answer's got to be B. For thousands of years, people in the Americas blank the bottle gourd. Looks like we're going to have some form of use. Okay, so for thousands of years, people in the Americas blank the bottle gourd, a large bitter fruit with a thick rind to make bottles. Okay, so well, this is in the past, okay, and it is for thousands of years. So I would say have used. If we look at our options, we wouldn't say to use or having used or using. Okay, this is a tense question. For thousands of years, people in the Americas have used the bottle gourd to make bottles. Okay, this right here is non-essential. You can get rid of it. And then you just have for thousands of years, people in the Americas have used the bottle gourd to make bottles. All right, so answer there's got to be B. We can go and move on to question number 19. Well, many video game creators strive to make their graphics ever more lifelike, and then we'll have something after that. Keep in mind that we start with well there. Okay, so that needs to have a comma after lifelike. Since we're starting out with something that's not an independent clause like that, we need to have that comma afterwards. So then after that, we would have others look to the past. So while many video game creators strive to make their graphics ever more lifelike, comma, we wouldn't say but others look to the past. We can get rid of A and D. We do need to have a comma after well, since that's sort of that introductory clause, but it's not an independent clause. So answer there would have to be C for number 19. In the 1950s, a man named J.M. was struggling to keep his business afloat when his sister-in-law, KZ, advised him to repurpose the company's product, a non-toxic clay-like substance for removing soot from wallpaper, as a modeling putty for kids. In addition, Zufall, then we got these right here. So in addition, Zufall blank selling the product under a child-friendly name. It looks like this is past tense. We can quickly go back to our last sentence. Okay, advised him. Okay, so we're dealing in the past tense. So Zufall advised him. Zufall suggested. Okay, we need to keep that past tense. So our answer would have to be answer choice A. Beatrice Potter is perhaps best known for writing and illustrating children's books such as The Tale of Peter Rabbit, 1902, but she also dedicated herself to mycology, the study of fungi. And then we have producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species she observed in nature and submitting her research on spore germination to the Linnean Society of London. Okay, everything that's from producing on is not an independent clause. Since it's not an independent clause, we're not going to use a semicolon. We're not going to put a period. Now, we do need to have a comma after fungi because it's a non-essential phrase or clause, okay, because we have, but she also dedicated herself to mycology, producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species she observed in nature. Okay, as you can see, we could remove the study of fungi and it would be fine. Okay, so we would need to have fungi and then a comma. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice D. So in assessing the films of Japanese director, here we need whatever comes after that to be who it is. Okay, so it can't be there are, it can't be the focus. Many critics would make sense. It can't be the use of Western literacy. It would have to be in assessing the films of Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, many critics, okay, needs to be what comes after this introductory modifier. Okay, so answer there would have to be A. Joshua Hinson, director of the Language Revitalization Program of the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma, helped produce the world's first indigenous language instructional app, Chickasaw Basic. And then we've got in 2009, an online television network, Chickasaw TV in 2010, and a Rosetta Stone language course in Chickasaw in 2009. So we're basically being tested on parallelism here, it looks like. So we've got in 2010, right, in 2015, those are both the parts that we end on. So we'd have Chickasaw Basic, and then we'd have to have the year. We also need after the year to have a semicolon. So after the year, we need a semicolon. So I guess based on that, it looks like the only answer choice left would be answer choice C. We can quickly check other parts of it. So Chickasaw Basic, after that, right after the name of the subject there, we would need that comma like we have there, which we do have here. And then an online television network would be what is introducing this Chickasaw TV, which we see we have here, right? The world's first indigenous instructional app. So C is perfect there. It maintains that parallelism with the rest of this text. And 23, our answer there will be C. The 47 geothermal springs of Arkansas's hot springs national parks are sourced via a process known as natural groundwater recharge, in which rainwater percolates downward through the earth, in this case, the porous rock of the hills around hot springs, and then blank to collect a subterranean basin. All right, so in this case, the porous rock of the hills around hot springs. Okay, so it looks like this is probably going to end up being non-essential. Let's just check by removing it. Okay, so in which rainwater percolates downward through the earth to collect in a subterranean basin. Okay, so it is non-essential. We would need to offset it then with that apostrophe. The 2 does need to be outside of this right here. Okay, so our answer's got to be C, basically just testing that you're able to pick up on the fact that we have this as non-essential and we have that M dash right there. Over 20 years ago, in a landmark experiment in the psychology of choice, Professor Sheena Iyengar set up a jam tasting booth at a grocery store. The number of jams available for tasting varied. So we got an independent clause there. And then we have, well, some shoppers had 24 different options, or just instead of some shoppers had 24 different options, others only 6. All right, so if we look at our options, we've got right here, option A with the colon. Okay, we start out by saying the number of jams available for tasting varied, and then after that, we go on to illustrate that by saying some shoppers had 24 different options, others only 6. If we have an independent clause and then another independent clause, which we do here, okay, then we can connect those with a colon, and we would want to do that when that second independent clause is illustrating the first. That's the best time to do it, which it is in this case. So A is perfect there. A will be our answer. Nigerian author Buchi Emecheta's celebrated literary oeuvre includes The Joys of Motherhood, a novel about the changing roles of women in 1950s Lagos, A Kind of Marriage, a television play about the struggles of a newlywed couple in Nigeria, and Head Above Water, her autobiography. In this case, we're looking at a parallelism question. We need a semicolon after, looks like that's after the description of the work. Okay, so a semicolon after the description of the work. If we go back up here, we got The Joys of Motherhood, a novel about the changing roles of women in 1950s Lagos. Okay, so that's the description. We do need to have a semicolon after that to maintain parallelisms. We get rid of A and we get rid of C. And then we have A Kind of Marriage. We can see what we should have after that. Looks like that'll be a comma after that, okay, to maintain that parallelism. So A Kind of Marriage would not be that colon, which is in C. Okay, so what's the difference here? Okay, comma right there versus no comma in D. So the answer would have to be B. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's 2013 novel Americana chronicles the divergent experiences of Ifemelu and Obinzi, a young Nigerian couple after high school. Ifemelu moves to the United States to attend a prestigious university. Blank Obininze travels to London hoping to start a career there. However, frustrated with the lack of opportunities, he soon returns to Nigeria. All right, so we need to transition here. So one goes to a prestigious university in the US. Meanwhile, at the same time, right, the other person travels to London. So that would make the most sense there. The other one's in fact, secondly, and nevertheless. We would want something that's showing that it's at the same time. So meanwhile would make the most sense there. So answer would be A. Organisms have evolved a number of surprising adaptations to ensure their survival in adverse conditions. Tadpole shrimp embryos, and then we have blank, can pause development for over 10 years during extended periods of drought. Okay, that's an example of adaptations to ensure survival in adverse conditions. So for example is the best transition we could do there. So answer's got to be B. In 1933, the 20th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified. The amendment mandates that presidential inaugurations be held on January 20th, approximately 10 weeks after the November election. This amendment requires newly elected U.S. senators and representatives to be sworn into their respective offices on January 3. What's the best transition here? All right, so we've got blank. This amendment requires newly elected U.S. senators. That's in addition, okay, because first we had talked about the president. Now we're talking about U.S. senators and representatives, so something in addition. So it's not instead. For instance, specifically, okay, in addition, perfectly. Okay, so answer there would have to be D. In her poetry collection, Thomas Mbuela, Rita Dove interweaves the titular characters' personal stories with broader historical narratives. She places Thomas's journey from the American South to the Midwest in the early 1900s within the larger context of the Great Migration. And then we have something here, so some transition. Dove sets events of Mbuela's personal life against the backdrop of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. All right, so previously we had her talking about how she places Thomas's journey from the American South to the Midwest within the larger context of the Great Migration. Here she's situating someone's personal life against the backdrop of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. These are both examples of her interweaving personal stories with broader historical narratives, but we wouldn't use for example there because we're just giving a second example. So we've got option of specifically, which would make sense. Thus, it's not causal regardless, is that it's not in spite of anything. Similarly would be perfect there because we're say one thing, and then we're just doing another example that's similar to the previous one. So similarly is perfect. D would be our answer there. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike was a road built between 1792 and 1794. It was the first private turnpike in the United States. It was connected the cities of Philadelphia and Lancaster in the state of Pennsylvania. It was 62 miles long. Student wants to emphasize the distance covered by the Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this? Okay, so we want to emphasize the distance. We got option A, 62-mile long Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike connected the Pennsylvania cities of Philadelphia and Lancaster. That one looks good. Let's take a quick look at B, C, and D. Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike was first private one. Doesn't talk about length. C doesn't talk about length. D also does not talk about length, and so there's got to be answer choice A. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Most but not all of the moon's oxygen comes from the sun via solar wind. Cosmochemist Kentaro Terada from Osaka University wondered if some of the unaccounted for oxygen could be coming from Earth. In 2008, he analyzed data from the Japanese satellite Kaguya. Kaguya gathered data about the gases and particles it encountered while orbiting Earth. Based on the Kaguya data, Terada confirmed his suspicion that Earth is sending oxygen to the moon. Let's go ahead and take a look at our question. The student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. Okay, so emphasizing the aim of the research study. Let's quickly go back up and identify the aim. So he wondered if some of the unaccounted for oxygen could be coming from Earth. He analyzed this data. So that's ultimately the aim here, is whether or not some of the unaccounted for oxygen on the moon is coming from the Earth. So we've got option A. As it orbited the moon, the Kaguya satellite collected data that was later analyzed. Well, that's not talking about the aim of the study, so we get rid of that. B, before 2008, he wondered if the moon was receiving some of its oxygen from Earth. Okay, so that's an example of what he was wondering. That's a pretty good description of the aim. I want to see if there's anything better. Let's take a look at C. He set out to determine whether some of the moon's oxygen was coming to the Earth. Yes, that's explicit. B is pretty much just saying that he wondered if the moon was receiving oxygen from the Earth, but that's not really describing the aim of the research study. That's just kind of describing the origins, which is him wondering. If we look at C, it's specifically describing the aim of the study, right? It's set out. That's directly the aim, to determine whether some of the moon's oxygen was coming to the Earth. So C looks perfect. We'll take a quick look at D. The study determined that Earth is sending. We don't really care about the determination. We care about the aim of the research study. So C is absolutely perfect. While researching a topic, a student's taking the following notes. Ducklings expend up to 62.8% less energy when swimming in a line behind their mother than when swimming alone. The physics behind this energy savings hasn't always been well understood. Naval architect used computer simulations to study the effect of the mother duck's wake. The study revealed that ducklings are pushed in a forward direction by the wake's waves. One determined that this push reduces the effect of wave drag on the ducklings by 158%. The student wants to present the study and its methodology. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? We got option A. A study revealed that ducklings, okay, we don't really care about, present the study and its methodology. Okay, so let's keep reading. A study revealed that ducklings, which expend up to 62.8% less energy when swimming in a line behind their mother, also experience 158% less drag. Doesn't talk about the methodology. B, seeking to understand how ducklings swimming in a line behind their mother save energy. Ziming Yuan used computer simulations to study the effect of the mother duck's wake. That does talk about the methodology. It doesn't present the findings of the study, but it does present the study. So that one looks really good. We'll take a look at C and D as well real quick. C, Ziming Wan studied the physics behind the fact that by being pushed in a forward direction by waves, ducklings save energy. One, that's badly worded, but really it's just not presenting the methodology at all. It's just saying what he studied. And then D, naval architect discovered that ducklings are pushed in a forward direction by the waves of their mother's wake, reducing the effect. Okay, that's just talking about the findings. We need to actually present the study and its methodology. B is the only answer choice that does that. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and consider sending a super thanks to help support my channel. Additionally, please drop a comment below letting me know what videos you want me to make in the future. And if you are looking for additional educational services that I offer, please check out my website, haydenrhodea.com.